إنا نحن نزلنا الذكر وإنا له لحافظون. In this ayah, we have 3 instances of natural med, which we are supposed to elongate for 2 counts. But we also have 2 instances of idgham, or nun mushaddada with ghunnah, of also 2 counts. But here's the thing, the 2 counts here we elongated with alif don't really sound like they are the same length as the 2 counts there with the ghunnah. So how's that possible? And shouldn't the length of ghunnah be 2 counts? But then why does it sound that it is longer? Well, first of all, harakah is the measurement unit meant to be used to measure the length of med. Ba is 1 harakah, but ba is 2 harakat. And so harakat indicate the length of med. But then what about using harakat to measure ghunnah? Well, many tajweed teachers, including lessons here as well, mention counts or harakat as a way to measure ghunnah, specifically 2 harakat. But this is done only to give an idea, especially to beginner learners that have to learn to elongate the sound of ghunnah and not just pass through it without any elongation. But strictly speaking, harakat cannot be used to measure ghunnah. So now if we don't use harakat to measure ghunnah, how do we measure it then? Well, as it happens, there is no measurement unit for ghunnah, but rather degrees of ghunnah, which means that not all ghunnahs are equally the same in length. And so there are 4 degrees of ghunnah, which determine how long the nasal sound is kept according to the case at hand. The 4 degrees of ghunnah are complete elongation, major elongation, minor ghunnah, and incomplete ghunnah. Let's break them down one by one and see where and how to use each one of them. Number 1, the complete ghunnah. It is the most complete and the fullest form of ghunnah, and it is also the longest of them all. And we apply it only in the cases of idgham, especially noon and mim mushaddada. So, when noon and mim are duplicated with shadda, and when noon is followed by any of these 4 letters, yanmu, like in these examples. حمالة الحطب تلك الجنة من يقول من ورائهم. Some scholars rate the noon and mim mushaddada as a separate degree that is even a little heavier than the degree of idgham, because it is essentially the duplication of 2 complete nasal sounds. Other scholars count them in with the idgham cases, which is the opinion that I'm going with here. If you want to compare that degree of ghunnah to actual harakat, it is somewhere between 3 and 3.5 harakat. That's the actual timing, depending on your speed, of course. And this is exactly why when you come across such cases of ghunnah, it becomes hard to digest that this ghunnah, for example, has the same length as this alif, because they simply are not. The next degree is the major ghunnah, or major elongation. This ghunnah is generated from cases of ikhfa and iqlab, and it is slightly shorter in length than the complete ghunnah, like in these examples. الإنسان ترميهم بحجارة من بعدهم. So they are shorter, but there is still significant amount of ghunnah involved in it. If you want to compare it to the actual harakah, it is somewhere between 2.5 and 3 harakat. Again, this is a rough estimation, just to put things in context and to help you understand the differences. The third degree of ghunnah is minor ghunnah, which happens when noon and mim are in the state of sukun. This happens whether with original sukun or with temporary sukoon at the end of the word, like أنعمت المؤمنون إنه هو التواب الرحيم. So the meme has the default ghunnah without elongation. That is why it is minor, because it has no elongation whatsoever. But there is of course the original ghunnah that cannot be separated from noon or meme. Finally, the last degree of ghunnah, which is the incomplete ghunnah, which is basically slightly less than the regular and the default nasalization state of the letter. And it happens when the nasal sounds, so noon or meme, occur with a short vowel on them, like يؤمنون بالغيب. So the nasal trait is affected by the vowel on these letters, so they produce an incomplete ghunnah. Now, the most important question here is, how can you master the timings of these ghunnah degrees? First, and the best way, is by listening and imitating a proper execution and getting corrected by a proficient qari. This remains the most effective method to learn anything about the Quran. Second, practicing these degrees of ghunnah in relation to one another to master the slight differences between them. So, the first and the second degrees are of elongation, so study them together. And put in mind that the first is slightly longer than the second. The same is said about the third and fourth degrees, which have no elongation, but one is slightly clearer than the other. So practice them in relation to one another. Here's an example which contains the first and the second degrees. Listen and try to find the minute differences. إن الإنسان من مكان بعيد وإن منكم إلا واردها. So there is a slight difference in the length of ghunnahs between the first and the second cases, which you might not pick up directly, and it requires a lot of practice. Here's an example containing all 4 degrees. إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. Finally, if any of these 4 degrees were over-elongated, we have what we call tatnin, which produces that heavy on-the-ear sound when ghunnah takes longer than it should. أنفسهم وما يشعرون وما هم بمؤمنين. So observe the differences between the degrees without exaggeration or obsessing too much with the rules of tajweed. So, in conclusion, while we might say that ghunnahs should be elongated for 2 harakat, it is important to know that this is just a simplification of the rule, and that, strictly speaking, not all ghunnahs are at the same degree. They do in fact range from complete ghunnahs with full elongation to incomplete ghunnahs. And you learn them the best by listening and imitating a qari, and by preference getting corrected by your shaykh. Thanks for watching. If you want to start learning the tajweed, then start with this playlist. And also don't forget to check my latest book about tajweed and download the companion app. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.